In Biberach, it was cold when we got there, in November. I didn't know the month, so it was very cold. And my dad had cut the toes out of my shoes because my feet were growing. And, And then walking up the hill, of course, it was snowing, so my feet were getting pretty wet.
Yeah. Frostbite on your toes.
I know, yeah. But that's what they had to do. You see, they had to improvise for their families to help them. And they all did that. And the women did as well in the camp. But anyway, we walked up this massively long hill. I never thought it was going to end. We got to the top and there's a Hitler Youth camp on the left. And they were spitting us. And because I wanted to spit, of course.
Not you.
And my mother saying, "Don't do that, Jill. Jill, come on." I was like, So I was always like that, I think.
Welcome back to the Guernsey Deportees, a podcast exploring the lives of the Guernsey people who were sent to the German internment camp Biberach during World War II. I'm your host, Ollie Guillou. My grandma, Jill Chubb, is the head of the Guernsey Deportees Association. Not only does she have a special insight into the broader picture of what happened to all of the deportees during their time at the camp, but she's also able to paint a vivid picture of what it was like for her. She's got an unbelievably sharp memory for the events that unfolded, which made for an incredibly moving conversation. And I'm about to share with you some of the clearest memories she's kept hold of after all these years of her time actually in Biberach itself.
Anyway, we eventually got into Biberach and they stood us in the square counting us for hours. And they kept recounting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, oh, with the fünf, with the fifth person. Children were getting fed out and running around. I wasn't one of them, I must say. Apparently a couple of people had died in Dorsten, Manning and a little boy, and they kept miscounting because they'd missed the dead. They expected more people. Anyway, we got into the barrack eventually, and I was in barrack number 3. We found a room where there was another family, which happened to be Ralph and Neville and his mum. So there's Mum, my brother Keith and me, and we shared the room through the wall in Biberach.
As Grandma says, Ralph Godwin and his family were there with them in barrack room 3, second row from the main gate.
And we were at the far end of that barrack because the other end was the end, where you went down the end.
What did you do down the end?
We went to the toilet. To go down to the toilet was a cold experience in the winter.
Before Biberach, Mrs. Wilde and Mrs. Godwin had never met before. Who'd have expected that all these years later, their children would still be in contact, standing in the same room regaling these tales? So, in Ralph's room was a window that faced the door on the left, and to his right were the Wildes.
And that remained the same for the next 2.5 years. And there was a table down the middle, there was a hot stove with a chimney stack out of it, which was our heating arrangement.
It sounds almost cosy. But despite Ralph's surprisingly cheerful demeanour, we mustn't forget this was a prison. Eyes were on you at all times, and it was unclear whether you'd ever leave.
I looked out of the camp I was in, at the barbed wire and stuff, and I could see fields and the mountains. And I think one day I'm going to run. I just want to get out of here and run. Just want to be free. And I think that's the thing that really hits you. You're confined into this small space with all these people, no privacy, except we were fortunate with our room. Otherwise, there's loads of people in one room, and it's very, very difficult. The different women, with their different problems. And
this sense of confinement was made worse by the view out over Biberach, a beautiful vista looking out over the Alps, which caught the eye of the people who were detained at the camp before the Guernsey Deportees arrived. You see, Biberach didn't start out as a place for families.
Camp at Biberach was, as some of you will know, is a pre-war German barracks, which is never really used as that. It was 1939. It then housed Allied prisoners of war officers, British and French, etc., from 1940, under reasonable conditions. And some of those original deportees said, the conditions actually were quite okay.
But that soon changed for the new wave of deportees. The huts became overcrowded, families were torn apart, boredom set in, and their freedom was taken from them. It's hard to imagine how locked down these Guernsey families must have felt, how oppressive it must have been.
I used to sit on the step by the gate, and I used to see these men coming in, frightening, very smart but frightening, shouting. Yeah, they shouted all the time. I hate to be shouted at, even now. And it's Rouse, yeah. Oplagen, Rouse, Anglino, no good, Kaputen, and all that sort of stuff, There's an administration block there, apparently, and they used to come in, the Gestapo and the SS men, and they used to go in the administration. But at the camp, they had the proper towers, with the machine gun at the top and all the searchlights. I never believed that, but searchlights used to keep me awake. So my mum put a blanket up, and I think with Ralph's mum as well. And I had the bottom bunk below my mother. But it's so dark, and I used to have these awful dreams of things floating in the air towards me. So I used to climb up about to a bunk, and I used to say, "Where's you mummy? Where's you mummy?" And they had to stop me because they was frightened that I'd break my leg or fall or something.
What terrified you most while you were there?
I was terrified all the time, Ollie, to be honest. I think it's sort of all these orders and shouting, and you must do this. You were scared to do anything wrong. And I think that's what terrified me, really. I didn't want to do anything wrong. Because if I did, I didn't know what would happen. So yes, I think I wasn't happy at all, really.
But Guernsey people being who they are, stubborn donkeys, they just kept going. And though they lived life under lock and key, life ticked on. And there were many days which were normal, mundane even. So I'd like to paint a picture of day-to-day life in Biberach.
The men were in a separate part of the camp, and the women and children were in another part. There was a curfew, so they were used to meet when the curfew, they were allowed to meet then. But when it was curfew, about 7 o'clock in the evening or something, everybody had to be in their barrack. So, and that's when the searchlights started and the dogs outside and all that sort of thing.
That must have been hard being apart from your dad.
No, not really. It wasn't. I mean, we knew we'd see him in the day. He just wasn't there at night with my mum and, and we were fine with Ralph and his mum and Neville. And, Mum protected us and we see our dad the next day.
And for Ralph, day-to-day life really wasn't all that bad. In fact, he had a rather sunny disposition reflecting on it all.
I cannot say that I ever came away being frightened by the camp in any way, simply because, as I've said, I believe it was large enough to absorb a young mind within the context of living. It was plenty going on, as it were.
Why do you think there is this difference of experience? For some people, it was this prison, this terrifying place to be, and for you and your brother, it was a playground. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because we were boys, and we had the comfort of being very close, and we also had the comfort of my mother being the teacher one of the teachers down at the school.
Hearing this took me aback a little. I hadn't considered that the people at the camp may have worked or gone to school. They even had a camp librarian who we'll hear about in a bonus episode of the podcast. So despite everything, they weren't consigned to do nothing.
Father worked at the Red Cross store with Mr. Matthews. They ran the Red Cross store, and it was not, I wouldn't say a cosy situation, but there was a generality about day to day. Mother went to teach, we went to school, we went to play, we came out and played, we had plenty of space to play. day followed day. There were people doing theatricals and doing anything that a small society would do. It'd come together, whether I don't know whether they did sap collecting or whatever, but there were things going on. And there was a theatrical group, and the older people did gymnastics out on the parade ground.
I was on the stage in the theatre at because they used to put on lots of shows there in Biberach. They were singing the Teddy Bear's Picnic, and I was a teddy bear.
So we were allowed to do most things with regard to keeping alive and passing the time of day.
And during his time working for the Red Cross, Ralph's dad kept a diary, which Ralph still has today, a wonderfully preserved red book. He actually got it out to show me. It's lined with thin paper and looks like an old school jotter.
This comes from the Red Cross stores. My father was the keeper of the instructions on it, and he kept that journal updated on a daily basis as to the coming and going of anybody of all nationalities, where they came from and where they went to. There was a multitude of people in there of all nationalities, but also records all the births that took place in the camp or in the other two hospitals which were close to Biberach. So there were a number of children, especially initially, because obviously we just come from Guernsey where life was going on normally. And some, obviously, women were pregnant when they arrived at the camp. But there was also arrival of babies during the later years.
Over the years, people have asked Ralph about the diary, and it has served as a useful trinket to flick back through from time to time for those curious about their family's past. And although it's simply a list of names, the diary also tells us a bit about some of the events that unfolded at the camp.
It also refers in there to the latter end of the war. We had a number of Jewish, North African Jews, who were, as I now know, were supposed to be going back to Italy. But because of the Allied advancements up Italy by the Americans and the British, they were cut off. So they got as far as Munich and were asked to turn right towards our camp. And they came into our camp. And there were two bodies split by a couple of days. We had 30 or plus the first day and about 60 or the other days. The interesting thing was that they were, as I say, North African Jews. They were in a pretty bad way, but they were being basically released by the Germans because they just were being overwhelmed by that time. It's an aside which probably shows that where they came from and how they thought that within 2 days of being in our camp, they were knocking on our barrack door. Would we give you 6 eggs for something? They were already bartering. I always remember seeing them at that door and asking my mother, what are they doing? Oh, they want to change something which they prefer to have.
The lives of objects, like this little red book, are often more fascinating than we realise. The journeys they go on, the meaning they hold for us, objects can tell 1,000 stories. And in our next episode, we'll hear about some of the objects and artwork from Biberach that Dr. Gilly Carr has uncovered over the years.
Oh, there are thousands, there are absolute thousands.
But I want to stay on jobs for now. While Ralph's dad worked at the Red Cross and his mother actually worked within the camp, some deportees ended up working for the Germans.
You had them here, of course, in Guernsey and Jersey. But you're seen as collaborating, but you have a family, you have a wife, you have maybe elderly parents, you have children to feed, and the Germans may pay you, not a huge amount, but something to work. So what do? You're in the camps. For some of the men, you also have that same agonizing decision of, if I can get some work outside the camp, which some men could get, they get paid, so they're able to at least alleviate the boredom, and get some money and, the possibility of getting better rations, etc. But you're then seen as collaborating. So it's difficult.
And that was a decision my great-grandfather made. But as you'll hear, it certainly didn't give you a free pass.
Actually, my father used to go to work for the Germans, go on a lorry. When I say work for the Germans, he did that because he sort of felt they felt they had to do it, He used to go and pick bread up for the camp and stuff, and anything they could find. Germans used to take them out working, I believe. They used to work them, the Germans. You know what they used to do. And when Ulm was being bombed, which is just down the road, my dad, they had to pick up bread, and it was full of glass. And they said, well, you did it, you eat it. And I remember that. I thought it's a bit gritty. But that was it was. And the first biscuit I ever had was a parcel that had been sent to Joy Godwin, that's Ralph's mum, from Canada. And we sat on the step with a little lump of butter and ate it. We cut it up, didn't we? We shared it, because that's what I learnt in the camp. Whatever you've got, you share with other people.
It must have fostered a really strong sense of community to be in it together like that. You're all there and none of you want to be, but you're helping each other out. You want to make sure that each of you gets through it. The community must have been strong in a way.
I think that, yes, it must have, people must have had strength from one another, definitely. And they had laughs together, and I think that experience must have strengthened people, and other people know. They never got over it, you see.
I absolutely loved hearing this, the mentality of those in the camp, the community spirit. But while we're on the subject of food, you'll be glad to hear that glass-filled bread wasn't the only thing they ate.
Well, we had potato peeling soup. I loved it. I went down once with my dad to the canteen. It was a canteen in a soup kitchen. And I had a cup, and if you had a potato peeling, it was lovely. Wow, the smell of it as well. Because I always wanted more, because you just had one cup. I don't know how many times a week you did that. I remember once a week. We had other food as well because of the Red Cross parcels. And that's the saviour. That's what, kept us going all right. So that was good.
Potato peeling soup. Not quite potato peel pie, but I have to admit, I'd kind of like to try it. But the rations, the infrequent deliveries, the limited options they had available to them, this wasn't just a matter of going hungry from time to time. For deportee Janet dos Santos, this extended period of malnutrition had a severe impact on the rest of her life. She kept a glass of water next to her during our interview because her throat dries up really easily, which she tells me is a direct result of being in Biberach.
Well, I've got no lining to my throat. It just didn't develop because I didn't have proper food. Also, I've had a lot of problems with my bone structure for the same reason, because my bones didn't develop properly. And when I was in my 40s, I think it was, something like that, my spine collapsed. I mean, as you can see, they managed to put it back together again. It got me walking. But, obviously, if at that age you're not eating properly, I mean, we didn't have, until the Red Cross parcels started coming through, I mean, it was bread, water and, potatoes, that was about it.
In the next episode, we'll be delving deeper into life in the camp, sharing some fascinating, hopeful, and sometimes funny stories. We'll hear what Christmases were like, and we'll also find out what it was like to fall seriously ill under German watch.
We went through to a ward where there were two nuns sitting there on chairs who had masks and chloroform ready for us.